A long time ago, when I was 6 years old, I'm in my early 40s now, I was kidnapped while walking with my mother and my brothers on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I have only splintered images as memories of this day, but the way my mother and my granny tell the story goes like this. I have 2 older brothers. We are all about a year apart. All 4 of us are walking along Bourbon Street, and there is a walk area with a large fountain. I recall playing in this fountain with all the other kids because it was Louisiana in the summertime and hot as balls. I'm not gonna lie, I was adorable as a kid. I still am. I'm the only ginger in my family, and when I was younger my hair was fire red. Not stupid orange, but color red that women all over the world spend billions on every year trying to get dyed in their hair. I had freckles and was always hopping, and I had an adorable stutter. I'll try to include a pic of my cuteness. Anyway, we were walking along. My brother, Jason, was in my mom's arms. He stubbed his toe and was upset, and myself clinging on to one hand, and my brother Josh, who was 2 years older than me, was walking directly in front of her. When these are my mom's words, a tall Creole, voodoo-type man with long hair walked up beside me and grabbed me and sprinted away. She started yelling, "That man took my baby! That man took my baby!" and was unsure if she should drop my brothers, leaving them vulnerable and exposed to pursue. Lucky for my ginger ass, there was a police officer on a horse within earshot, came trotting up. My mom yelled at the cop, "That man took my baby!" and pointed him out just as he rounded a corner out of sight. The cop took off after the suspect, and about 2 blocks later the cop had caught up with me in the arms of this guy who dropped me realizing he was screwed, and tried to get away in a car that was waiting for him. A car chase ensued with them and the cops. Now, depending on who tells the story, Mom or Granny, after the chase ended, the suspects fired at police and the cops ended up killing them. Or they didn't. I'm still unsure. But I was rescued and brought back to my mom, unscathed, a little bit freaked the fuck out. There is no telling what would have happened to me if that cop not been there on his horse. I may have been sacrificed, a voodoo thing, or sold in the sex market, or who knows what. Something to note in this story. The school we went to had 2 playgrounds. Me and my older sister used to walk everywhere because our mom wasn't around much since she's always working. We lived a 2-minute walk away from our old elementary school, and a lot of the kids in the neighborhood would go there after school hours, so we found ourselves there after school most of the days of the week. Since up the road was a cluster of fast food restaurants, we decided to grab dinner from the local Burger King, and afterwards we didn't feel like going home, so we walked to the elementary school. It was around 7 p.m., so we knew nobody would be there. Me and her sat on the top of a slide and just talked, and it got dark pretty quickly. We thought it would be fun to play hide and seek because we knew it would be hard to find each other in the dark, and with 2 playgrounds to hide around. We played a few rounds and it was my turn to count. I counted on the concrete with my ears covered to make sure it was harder to find her. Once I was done counting, I went right to the first playground, and I heard a loud slam coming from the building's back door. I look over and see someone opening and slamming the dumpster, and me and my paranoid self, I hid and just kept watching him. I had no idea where my sister was, but was more worried about the man. After looking in the dumpster, he just stops and stands there and begins talking to himself. Since we were at a distance, I look around the area for my sister and whisper her name, but get no response. The man keeps saying random things to himself, but I couldn't hear anything. After a few more minutes of sitting still in fear, I hear my sister say my name, and I turn my head and see her standing by the other playground. I book it towards her, and she whispers at me to run. We both run to where there's more light, and she tells me to stop and to walk and act like it's normal so the person doesn't think we're trying to get away from him. After we walk to the parking lot, we see a security car and we sigh in relief and laughing, thinking it was just a security guard. We continue walking to the entrance gate and the car leaves. Once we begin walking on the main road to get home, keep in mind this is a main road and there are cars constantly driving. I get a strange feeling and look behind me. My heart drops to my stomach as I see someone following behind us, coming from the school. I immediately whisper to my sister and she looks back, and I could see the fear in her face. The man wasn't thin, and we knew we could outrun him if we really needed to. Although we were close to home, my mom was working and we didn't want the man knowing where we lived. Me and my sister started to speed walk, and I looked behind me again. The man started walking faster. We both started bolting, and we turned into our driveway and hid behind a few trees. Luckily, we had a long driveway surrounded by woods, and it was dark. So we continued looking at the road for the man, and after a few minutes, we didn't see him anywhere. I'm not sure what would have happened if he caught up to us, but I do not want to find out. This isn't one of those stories like, oh, this man looked sketchy, I almost died. But when I was 16, I genuinely believed a man in Walmart wanted to kidnap me. It started off with him following me. I noticed he was in every aisle my mom and I were in. But at first I thought it was just a coincidence. It was an older man, probably in his 50s to 60s, and I just had a very bad feeling about him. Another man in front of us dropped his wallet, and the creepy guy walked up and stuck the wallet back in the man's back pocket instead of just handing it to him, which I thought was pretty odd. Shortly after that, my mom walked to self-checkout, and I wasn't feeling well, so I asked her for the car keys. I walked to the other side of the store where we had parked, but I had forgotten where the car was, so I decided to sit on the bench outside the hair salon and wait until my mom was finished. While playing on my phone, I got the uncomfortable feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced up and saw the creepy man staring at me. Now there's two things you should know. One, the hair salon was closed, so he had no reason to be standing outside it. And two, his groceries were bagged up, so he had already finished shopping. He asked how I was doing, and I mumbled out, "Fine," and glanced back down at my phone. I kept looking up out of the corner of my eye, and every time he was still staring at me. That's when my blood ran cold. I realized he had been standing behind us when I asked my mom for the car keys. He must have overheard, and was most likely planning on following me out to the parking lot. My instincts kicked in, and I had, and to this day still do, a strong feeling that this man was up to no good. I kept trying to call my mom discreetly, but she wouldn't answer, so I got up and walked back over to the other side, where she was still ringing up for the groceries. I stayed with her, and when we walked out the store, the man was still standing outside the hair salon. I watched through the window when we walked out the doors, and he never took his eyes off of me. I am so glad I never walked out to the parking lot alone, because who knows what would have happened. This happened around 7 years ago. I took my son with my mother to the shop. As I was bagging up my stuff, I noticed a man staring at my son. I also had his twin sister with me. I asked my mom to keep an eye on my son while I paid. At about 2 minutes into paying and whatnot, I glanced up and saw my son being walked out by this man. I ran up, scooped him up, and walked away. My biggest regret is not yelling at the man or telling security. I was just in shock that it happened, and it happened so fast. That was the most scared I've ever been, seeing my little boy being walked out by a stranger. I feel that it has changed me as a parent, and I am so overprotective of my kids now. Maybe too much. Okay, I didn't realize this was interesting enough to post, but I've seen some worse ones, so here it goes. In about 1984, I was 10. Back then was just the start of stranger danger, and kids really did leave in the morning during their summer and not come back until dinner time. One of those days I had been playing baseball and swimming throughout the day and was on my way home on my bike. I got to the end of the street, and an African-American elderly couple stopped in the middle of the road, normal suburban street. The old woman was driving, and I distinctly remember her thick glasses, but she asked me where the church was and if I could give her directions. I said sure and started telling her. She asked me to come closer as she couldn't hear well. I got close enough that I could put my hand on her door to help me stay up on my bike, and she put her hand on top of mine, but I continued with directions. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement and turned to see the elderly gentleman with both arms out ready to grab me. He had snuck around the car, squatting down the whole way. I jumped back and took off on my bike as fast as I could. The car took off 100 miles per hour down the road, so I narrowly avoided being kidnapped. Funny thing is I went and I told my mom what happened, and she said, "Yeah, okay, wash up, dinner will be in a minute." I never really thought about it again until I read this sub.